we want to talk about the American Revolution and the roles that Louisiana played. Good morning. My name is Donald J. Sharp, and I'm sort of a history buff. I've been doing it for almost of my life. I was a teacher and I taught history in school. But here it's the last day of September, September the 30th, 2025, and we want to do an interview about the history of the American Revolution. Congress in 2023 passed legislation that would help celebrate and create interest in the American Revolution of 250 years ago. So we have 9 months before they're going to start the celebration on July the 4th, 2026. Congress wanted rolls of the 13 colonies or plus the other 4 areas that become states, 17, that had roles into the American Revolution. What part did they play in the starting of the revolution, the fighting, and the ending? Louisiana at the time, we're in Louisiana now, but Louisiana at the time was divided into 2 colonies. It was British West Florida then, and the Spanish colony, due to the 7 Years' War, which Great Britain defeated the French and the Spanish. But anyway, in my research all the years, I've looked back and checking all that. I found out that the future state of Louisiana had 3 main roles in this beginning American Revolution. And that's what we want to discuss there. One of the main roles, I think, is probably the most interesting and complicated role that the future state of Louisiana was to play. It was about 2 men named the last name Edwards. One of them was a celebrated Baptist preacher, Morgan Edwards. And this is one of the key pieces of history that I used in developing this role on the American Revolution. It's about Morgan Edwards, how he became the beginning of his life and everything, and how he became a Baptist preacher. The second part is a man called Morgan Edwards, and we later found out his last name was Hewitt. And he's tied up with he got the name from Morgan Edwards, the Baptist preacher, and this is the story of it. And it starts with Morgan Edwards, the Baptist preacher, in Cork Island, where he was assistant pastor. I'm not going to go into it, but if you're interested, this man, Howard Stewart from California, did a real good job of research and writing. The problem is, you see the title, A Dazzling Enigma, the story of Morgan Edwards. Morgan Edwards was a brilliant and popular Baptist preacher that started in Wales, England. The trouble is, he had a passion for collecting history, and the history of the Baptist Church in the United States in that time. But the trouble is, he did all his history, saving it and everything. He did little for his history of his family. And there's a lot of the discrepancies and distortions on it. So this first part of the story is in this book here, The Dazzling Enigma. Go to your library, or you can purchase it through Amazon. The second part of the story, and all this, I put here the title of this, A Mystery Solved, The Identity of Morgan Edwards in Bayou Castan is revealed. I took it step by step of how he got assistant pastor in Ireland. He married an Irish girl called Mary Nunn. They had trouble in 1754. They started having trouble right after they were married, physical trouble. She had 4 miscarriages in 6 years. Well, they were in Cork. He was the assistant pastor. The total thing, she got pregnant 8 times, and 6 of the times she had miscarriages. Not only that, Morgan Edwards, the Baptist preacher, was there he was there 10 years, but his parishioners all of a sudden didn't like his sermons, and they wanted to change pastors. So they let him go in 1769. He was there from 1750 to 1769. So with his wife, he was dismissed. He was going to head back to Wales. But on the first stop, they were going to stop in Dublin. Baptist convention was being held in Dublin. This is where the mystery, the enigma starts. Not only was he having trouble and he lost his job in Cork, but his wife was having physical trouble. They don't have it in the books, but Morgan Edwards adopted, and his wife adopted an orphan. I don't know if the boy was orphan or not. I believe as you look into the story, he was related some way to Morgan Edwards, his wife, Mary Nunn. But anyway, very little is said. And remember, in those days, in the middle 1700s in Ireland, they didn't keep civil records. It's just word of mouth. And this is the problem. The distortion comes in. A lot of people don't believe that Morgan Edwards, Morgan Edwards, the Baptist preacher, and his wife Mary, adopted a boy. But from all evidence, it all points that, to me, as I was growing up, somebody gave me a saying, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and walks like a duck, it's a duck. Well, all these things came together, and it appears to me, you be the judge, that Morgan Edwards, the Baptist preacher, and his wife adopted his boy. This boy is going to be a very important centerpiece in the story, and that's why I'm taking you along through this. Morgan Edwards, the Baptist preacher, gets back to Wales, the town of Rye. But over in the colonies, they were having trouble in Philadelphia in the Baptist church there. They needed a minister. So the minister in England, the Baptist, recommended Morgan Edwards. And Morgan Edwards accepted the job. So him and his wife Mary left, and they headed to Philadelphia in 1769. they took the boy with them, but nothing is in writing that said they adopted him. But later we'll show that he had some very important statements to make later when he was living in the United States. Anyway, Morgan Edwards, the Baptist preacher, and his wife goes to Philadelphia. He's very popular. Even Benjamin Franklin would love to hear him speak. But the wife kept on having miscarriages. But finally she had 2 children that didn't die. There was a Billy, a William, and a Joshua. Nothing is said about the foster boy that they had in. He was growing up. But one thing is very critical in its story. Morgan Edwards, the Baptist preacher, was very, very strong on education. And that's in the book here. They said that it's never too early to start your education. So it appears, and it shows later, that Morgan Edwards Hewitt, lady's name, we find out his name was Hewitt, was getting the best education he possibly could, and it would pay off in his role in the American Revolution. The 2 boys that Morgan Edwards, Baptist preacher, had were raised by the mother, Mary Dunn. Morgan Edwards, the Baptist preacher, started to collect information on the Baptist churches in America by horseback. Also, he had a passion for education. He wanted to start a college that today is called Brown University in Rhode Island. But anyway, Morgan Edwards, the foster son, was getting into his teens, but nothing is mentioned about it. He had the education, and it appears that he got into surveying. Later it showed on that. But anyway, the tensions between the American colonists, the patriots, and the British government was starting to get heated up. The British government didn't want to keep paying for the troops that they kept in America there. They wanted the colonists to pay for it. So they started acts which are called intolerable acts. Anyway, Morgan Edwards, the Baptist preacher, continued to gather information that he planned to write 12 volumes on the history of the Baptist Church. His wife dies in 1769, and she was pregnant again. The record book says she was buried in the church, the Baptist church in Philadelphia. Morgan Edwards, the Baptist preacher, didn't stay single long. Shortly after, he married. All that's in the book, and I'm not going to go in. But he winds up living in Delaware. And as the situation gets worse, he gave up, after his wife died, being the preacher that gives the sermons on Sunday. He concentrated on the history of the Baptist Church and development of the colony. But he did this. The city is Pancaria, Delaware, and all that's in the book. But his parishioners, who were loyal Americans, started to give him trouble. So he switched. He recanted from being a loyal British loyalist with the king to become an American patriot and all that's in the book there, like I said. The British Army was on the march. Cornwallis and General Howe had 15,000 troops, and they were going to march on Philadelphia through Delaware, and they were going to put this resistance, end it quickly. Washington and his generals had 12,000 men, and it's called the Battle of Brandywine Creek. Anyway, it looks like Morgan Edwards, the Baptist preacher's name was on the British list, because when they got to Delaware, where his house was, they destroyed all his property, burned his house, and almost killed him. He barely got away. The British Army kept marching on, and they captured Philadelphia for a month and a half. Morgan Edwards, the Baptist preacher, couldn't get back to Philadelphia, and his sons back there, and his fourth son. Finally, he made it back at the end of November, and he told them that what happened to him. The Continental Congress was planning to do something about British West Florida, because James Willing, who was related to one of the main family there, told him that there's a lot of settlers in British West Florida that could turn on us. So they organized a raid, and James Willing was going to be in charge of it. They appointed him a captain. And the object was to do two things, and this is very important for the history. One is to punish the strong British loyalists, as the British were doing to the Americans, burn their houses, shoot the ones that are the ones that are the most giving trouble and killing them. And the second thing was the ones that they were on the fence, the majority of the settlers who haven't decided whether to go with the British or the Americans, to make them take an oath. But how are we going to do that? We're going to take Morgan Edwards, whose name is Hewitt. He's 21 now, and he has a good education and a penmanship. He will make up the oaths and give it to him. So he was part of the Willing's raid. One of the biggest obstacles that his researchers say is that down in New Orleans, it was Spanish, and Governor Bernard Galvez, after the raid took place, wanted the census taken of New Orleans, because they had a lot of refugees that had their houses burned and all that. And in the census there on St. Louis Street was James Willing and his 5 lieutenants in a warehouse. Right below him was the name Morgan Edwards. He was the Hewitt. People would say if he knew that Willing and was Willing on a raid, why wasn't he living? Because of the rules of war. The rules of war are this, and Governor Galvez had into, if it's all completely military and not civilians, you get to keep the spoils of the war on it. And the Willing's raid was after money and the slaves. The money was in the slaves. How do we know this? Because several of the people who had their homes burned and slaves taken by Willing complained to Galvez, saying that it wasn't the military, it was the civilian freebooters that were on there that took it. And Galvez agreed with them and made him give back those slaves. They still rounded up 74 slaves, which is a very big sum in total. And guess what? Later on, when Morgan Edwards Hewitt, we found out his name, was over and settled Bayou Castan, which is now Mandeville, he gets 3 slaves. Why did he come up with? Because he was part of Willing's raid, and he took part of the, and it was his job. They have a beautiful oath of allegiance by Captain Pickles on the North Shore, and it was in Morgan Edwards Hewitt's own penmanship, handwriting. People told me this several times over. So Willing wears out his welcome. He leaves by ship in September. He's captured by the British. They keep him on a prison ship for 2 years in New York Harbor. Finally, he gets released in 81. Morgan Edwards Hewitt stays. He continues it. William Pickles is hired by Oliver Pollock to command the boat, the Morris tender, and to stop this British ship that's been trolling Lake Pontchartrain to West Florida. How do we know this? Because after the battle and Pickles wins, he stops. The battle was on September the 10th, 1778. The next month later, he stops at Bayou Castan, where he has this parchment written out by Hewitt, and he makes the 19 settlers take the oath of allegiance. It's returned to Pollock. Pollock sends it up to John Jay, the president of the Continental Congress, and he reads it in Congress as being the first people to swear allegiance to the American Revolution. So this is one of the, but anyway, getting back now, since Morgan Edwards, the Baptist preacher, is in a prison ship in New York and everything, let's turn the story. This is now during the war. Turn it to Morgan Edwards Hewitt. The battle takes place September the 10th, and William Pickles is successful. He patrols the lake. He sends a boat to block the Wrigley's, so anybody trying to get in and out. And then he starts patrolling the lake. I believe that Hewitt had Pickles' ear and said, look, I found out something, that I think I have cousins that are on Bayou Castan. How did he know this? Because one of the crew members was a man named William Hewitt, an Indian trader. And he was born in Virginia, and I think that's what I'm trying to find out the last. But anyway, so Pickles stops, the oath of allegiance is read, Morgan Edwards Hewitt meets Margaret Smith, one of the settlers who marries her, and he settles on Bayou Castan. He gets those slaves, and he has the notary in New Orleans sell them there. But anyway, he settles in right after the oath of allegiance is read, and the war continues on. But anyway, let's see. So Morgan Edward Hewitt starts having children, and he's living at Bayou Castan. He makes friends. Now remember, he was born in a Catholic country, but Oliver Cromwell put Protestant soldiers in there. And I don't know if he married a woman, a Protestant. I think it should. Anyway, he made friends with officials in New Orleans. He was selling wood bark to a tannery and wood and bricks and everything. But he made friends with a man called Alamaster. John Vincent, he was the... And all of a sudden, a man comes in the area. His name's Jacob Miller. For the next 12 years, Morgan Edwards Hewitt's going to have trouble. Even though he died, his heirs are going to have trouble with Jacob Miller. But so Jacob Miller went to Cronolette, the governor, and said, I know of land that is the king's land. Actually, it would belong to Morgan Edwards Hewitt. And I would like 400 acres to start a brickyard, because we just had a big fire, and the law now is you have to build a house with brick. Cronolette did not check, and he issued the land grant. And this was a thorn in the side. So Morgan Edwards Hewitt goes to New Orleans, sees his friend Alamaster, who is busy rebuilding the 3 buildings in Jackson Square with his surveyor and builder, Gilberto Gillimore. He designed and built. So he gets Gillimore and he takes him back to Bayou Castan to measure, to survey. His lands were never surveyed. And he does this beautiful survey. This is part of the thing, showing the 3 people that are left over there, and later, and also it shows how the cemetery starts on that. Anyway, he goes back to Alamaster and he says, look, I have my 2 daughters growing up, and they need to be baptized in a Catholic church. He wanted to renew his religion and use his friend. And so he takes his 2 daughters, and Alamaster is one of the sponsors. And he goes to St. Louis Cathedral. There was a Spanish priest, Joseph Villa, who baptizes 2. But on this page is a very critical piece of information, and I'm sorry I had to take this long way to get to it. Morgan Edwards tells the priest, my name is Morgan Edwards, but it's not really Morgan Edwards. My name is Hewitt, and my father was David Hewitt. My mother was Margaret Bradley. I'm from Dublin, Ireland. And this is the problem and the role that we come to on that. Trouble is, as soon as this survey is made by Gilberto Gillimore, and he's very important, Pensacola doesn't know that he died in Pensacola after New Orleans became American territory by the Louisiana Purchase. He had no place to go. He wasn't paid for his work. The politicians treated him poor. But anyway, he says, my name is Hewitt. And this is what the story is, the role is. He dies right after the survey is made in April of 1779. And Alamaster dies a month later after that. So here we have a role. The descendants of Morgan Edwards Hewitt sells to Bernard Maroney in 1829 the property that they had. Morgan Edwards Hewitt, as you can see, was a very important person in the development of the North Shore and the future town of Mandeville. He had 1,900 acres. He had 2 Spanish grants, and he bought another grant next to his mother-in-law, Mary Smith. But this is the role of the Morgan Edwards. Starts with the Baptist preacher. The war's over. He goes back to Delaware. He marries a 3rd time, and he dies in 1801. It's very complicated in saying that you be the judge. You read the blogs that we put on the internet, and keep a open mind. We don't have a document that comes out and says that Morgan Edwards, the Baptist preacher, and his wife, Mary Nunn, adopted a boy, because they didn't keep records there. And Morgan Edwards, the Baptist preacher, even though he was good at records for the Baptist church, he was that's why they call him an enigma. If you want to find out about Morgan Edwards, the Baptist preacher, get this book. I wish you a good day. Thank you.